Cheating wife caught red-handed. I unleash heavy revenge with DNA and shocking STD results, divorce exposed. The moment I glanced at her phone screen, a chill settled in my bones. My wife, Amelia, laughed at a message that wasn't from me. A rare sound. One I hadn't heard in ages. I didn't see the name, just the heart emoji flashing beside it. That was all I needed to feel the first cracks in my certainty. For days, maybe weeks, I'd sensed something shifting between us. The late nights she'd claim were for work, the dinners she'd miss, saying she wasn't feeling well. They all stacked up into a quiet tower of suspicion. But I never dared say it aloud. What kind of husband doubts his own wife? That night, after she fell asleep, I slipped into the living room, replaying the pieces in my mind. It wasn't enough. I needed more than gut feelings and paranoia. After all, Amelia and I had built 10 years together. 2 kids, countless memories. If she was betraying me, I couldn't afford to be wrong. I decided, then and there, I would find out for certain. I would uncover the truth, whatever it took, no matter how ugly it turned out to be. The next morning, I kept a close eye on Amelia, paying attention to every move, every glance at her phone, each hollow smile she threw my way. It was as if she'd built a wall around herself, only letting me in just enough to keep up appearances. I could barely recognize the woman I had once known so well. I had never snooped before, but as she left for work, I took the chance. Her phone was locked tight, so I started with her laptop. After a few tries with old passwords, it finally opened. My heart raced, half hoping I'd find nothing, half prepared to see every confirmation of my worst fears. What I found was strange. In her email, hidden between work-related messages, there was a series of emails from a guy named Brent. The messages were vague, with words that could be excused as friendly but had an intimacy that made me question everything. The latest email read, "Meet you at the usual spot tomorrow? Can't wait to see you." The usual spot? My stomach churned. This wasn't just some platonic exchange. Brent, whoever he was, had established something secret and ongoing with my wife. As much as it pained me, I knew I needed more. A mere email wouldn't be enough if I was going to confront her. I needed undeniable, irrefutable proof. But the reality of what I was about to uncover filled me with dread. I couldn't go through this alone. The thought of confronting her without hard proof gnawed at me, and I needed someone who could dig deeper than I ever could. That's when I thought of an old friend from college, Greg, who worked as a private investigator. We hadn't talked much since graduation, but if anyone could help, it would be him. I dialed his number, heart pounding. After a few rings, he picked up, his voice gruff but familiar. "Greg? It's Ethan. I need a favor." There was a pause before he spoke again. "Ethan, man, it's been years. What's going on?" I hesitated, the words heavy on my tongue. I think Amelia is cheating on me, and I need you to help me find out." Greg didn't waste a second. "I'm sorry to hear that, Ethan. I'll help. Send me any details you have on this guy and any suspicious time she's been out. We'll figure it out." Within hours, Greg had a plan in place. He'd start with her workplace, track her movements, and see if there was any evidence of her meetings with Brent. I felt a strange mixture of relief and dread. I knew there was no turning back now. Whatever Greg found, I'd have to face it head-on. That night, I lay next to Amelia, every inch of me tense with the knowledge of what was coming. She was sleeping soundly, blissfully unaware that the secrets she had been keeping were about to unravel. Days passed with excruciating slowness. Each time Amelia mentioned work or slipped out for a meeting, my heart raced, wondering if this would be the time Greg found something definitive. Every moment of her absence felt like a test of my patience, my sanity hanging by a thread. Finally, late on a Thursday night, I got a message from Greg. The words lit up my phone screen like a warning sign. "We need to talk." I found something. I called him immediately, my hands trembling as I held the phone. Greg's voice was steady, professional, but I could hear the undercurrent of pity. He didn't want to be the bearer of bad news, but he'd taken on this case for me, and he had to see it through. "I followed her today, Ethan," Greg began. "She met him at a hotel. They were together. There's no doubt about it." My chest felt like it was collapsing. A hotel? So, all those late nights, those business dinners, and mysterious meetings had been lies, designed to cover up something far more sinister. My vision blurred, my grip on the phone tightening as I tried to contain the surge of anger and betrayal. I didn't say a word, and Greg continued. I took pictures. Video, too. I didn't want to, but I thought you'd need it if you were planning any legal action. Legal action. My head spun at the thought, but I knew he was right. If I wanted justice, if I wanted to expose this betrayal for what it was, I'd need every ounce of proof he had. I thanked him in a voice that sounded foreign, detached. I could barely process it all. As I hung up, I felt like my life had just shattered into 1,000 unrecognizable pieces. And now it was my move. The next morning, I looked at Amelia with new eyes. She moved around the kitchen, humming to herself as she made breakfast, blissfully unaware of the devastation she'd left in her wake. Her every smile, every casual touch felt like a mockery, a reminder of the lies she'd spun around me. But I wasn't going to confront her. Not yet. I wanted her to feel as if everything was normal, to have no idea of the storm brewing just below the surface. I needed time to prepare, to make sure that when I finally confronted her, there would be no escape, no excuses she could throw my way. I would hit her with every piece of evidence until she had no choice but to face the ugly truth. I went to work, going through the motions, but inside, my thoughts were racing. I contacted a lawyer to understand my options, gathering information on how best to handle the divorce and custody of our 2 kids. The lawyer advised me to remain calm, to keep things steady, and avoid any emotional outbursts that could compromise my position. I nodded along, though my heart was boiling with anger. Later that evening, I looked through the files Greg had sent, photos, timestamps, and video clips. Each image felt like a knife, a fresh wound opening every time I saw Amelia with him. It was surreal, like watching a horror film in which I was the helpless bystander. But instead of crumbling, I felt a strange sense of purpose. Each image, each timestamp only fueled my resolve. This wasn't going to end quietly. I would make sure that her betrayal was known, that there was no hiding from the truth. For years, I'd been the devoted husband, the supportive partner, and the father who put his family first. And now, she was about to understand the consequences of betraying someone who had given her everything. I spent the next few days in quiet preparation. Amelia went about her routine, oblivious to the carefully laid plans taking shape in my mind. With each passing day, I refined the details of how I would expose her, not just to me but to everyone we knew. My mind replayed the potential scenes, imagining the look on her face when she finally realized the extent of her betrayal's fallout. One afternoon, I took Greg's evidence to the lawyer, who advised me on a strategy to ensure custody and protect my assets. He suggested that I gather more evidence, specifically anything that could paint a clearer picture of her deceit in case she tried to contest anything. That night, after putting the kids to bed, I accessed her laptop again. It felt intrusive, but this wasn't the time for politeness. I found her social media chats, conversations that seemed harmless but hid underlying meanings. Her chats with Brent showed an undeniable closeness, inside jokes, and memories I had no knowledge of. The words leaped off the screen, hitting me like waves of betrayal. One line in particular made my blood run cold. "Sometimes, I wish I could stay with you forever. No more pretending. No more pretending." As if our life, our marriage, and our children were some elaborate farce she was playing in while waiting to be set free. I saved every screenshot, every incriminating line. I was ready to take this all the way. By the time I was done, it felt as if I had seen into a side of her I'd never known existed. But my anger had morphed into something else, a cold, calculating resolve. The groundwork was set. The day was coming soon. With the evidence in hand, I wanted to orchestrate a moment that Amelia would never forget, a public confrontation that would expose the truth to everyone in our lives. She'd shattered the trust between us, and I would return the favor in a way that left no room for denials or justifications. I wanted her to feel the weight of the betrayal, the pain that had kept me awake night after night. The idea came to me one evening as we planned a family dinner to celebrate our anniversary. It was a date we celebrated every year, typically with close family and friends, a gathering that had become tradition. Only this time, I knew the real reason behind the celebration. I called up the venue and booked a private space, making sure everyone who mattered to us would be there. Her parents, our friends, our siblings, everyone who had believed in our perfect marriage. Amelia thought it was simply my way of showing appreciation, a renewal of vows, perhaps, for a decade of commitment. I let her believe that. In the days leading up to the dinner, I kept up appearances, laughing and smiling, even joking with her about the event. I made sure she didn't suspect a thing. Every time she texted or laughed at a secret joke with Brent, I reminded myself of the endgame, and my resolve only strengthened. On the day of the dinner, I stood in front of the mirror, adjusting my tie, rehearsing in my mind exactly what I'd say when the time came. I'd written out every word, planned every step. This wasn't just a moment of revenge. It was my chance to reclaim the life I had given to someone who no longer deserved it. When Amelia walked into the room, dressed to the nines, radiating the charm that had once made me fall in love with her, I barely felt a thing. I knew what was coming, and in just a few hours, so would she. The dinner began with laughter and light-hearted conversations, just like any other gathering we'd hosted over the years. Friends and family were chatting, enjoying drinks, and complimenting Amelia on her elegant dress, unaware of the storm that was about to unfold. Amelia looked radiant, flashing me smiles across the room, entirely oblivious to the truth I held in my hands. I played my part well, making toasts, reminiscing with friends, and acting every bit the doting husband. It felt surreal, knowing that in mere minutes, everything was about to change. As dinner was served, I felt a quiet tension building in my chest. I took a deep breath, savoring the last few moments of calm. Then, as the last plate was set down, I stood, raising my glass. A hush fell over the room as everyone turned their attention to me, expecting a sentimental toast. "Thank you all for being here tonight," I began, keeping my voice steady. "Tonight isn't just about celebrating our anniversary. It's about the people who have been there with us, who have supported us through every high and low." I glanced at Amelia, who smiled warmly, clearly enjoying the moment. But her smile faltered when she noticed the way I was looking at her, the intensity behind my gaze. "Amelia," I said, lowering my glass, "we've shared a lot together. Memories, dreams, a family. But lately, I've discovered that some things have been shared that I wasn't aware of." Confusion flickered in her eyes, and I could see the first traces of panic beginning to settle on her face. "Ethan, what are you talking about?" Taking a breath, I reached into my pocket and pulled out the stack of printed screenshots, photos, and the document Greg had compiled. "I'm talking about this. About your secret meetings with Brent. The hotel rooms, the late nights, the lies." The room went silent. Every pair of eyes turned to Amelia, wide with shock, as I placed the evidence on the table for everyone to see. She gasped, her face draining of color. "Ethan, wait, this isn't—" "I can explain." But I didn't give her a chance. "Explain? You mean the hotel reservations? Or the text messages saying you wished you didn't have to pretend?" A murmur rippled through the room, a mix of disbelief and disgust. Amelia's parents looked horrified, her mother clutching her pearls, her father staring at her with an expression of sheer disappointment. She reached for my hand, but I pulled back, refusing to let her touch me. "Everyone here deserves to know what you've done. I was ready to share my life with you, to keep building a future. But you threw it all away. For what? Some thrill? A double life?" Amelia's face twisted, tears pooling in her eyes, but the sympathy that once would have bubbled up in me was nowhere to be found. Amelia stammered, searching for words as everyone in the room stared at her, their shock and disapproval weighing down on her. I could see the desperation in her eyes, but I had no sympathy left to give. She had done this to herself. "Ethan, please, this is a misunderstanding," she managed, her voice shaking. "Let's talk about this in private." "Oh, now you want privacy?" I replied, voice laced with irony. "How convenient. You didn't care about privacy when you were sneaking around with Brent. You didn't think about our family, our friends, or what this would do to our children." The mention of our kids made her flinch. For a second, It seemed like she might have realized the full impact of her betrayal. She glanced around the room, her gaze meeting her parents' disappointed eyes, then shifting to her friends, all of whom looked appalled. The silence was suffocating, but I wasn't finished. I pulled out one final document from my pocket, a DNA test. "This right here," I said, holding up the paper, "is the reason I'll never forgive you." The results of this test revealed something that makes this betrayal even worse. The daughter we raised together, the one I thought was mine, she's not. You lied to me for years, Amelia. You made me believe I was her father. A collective gasp echoed through the room. The weight of the revelation settled over everyone, disbelief mingling with shock and disgust. Amelia's eyes went wide, her hands shaking as she covered her mouth. "I didn't. I thought," she whispered, but her voice trailed off, lost in the mess of lies she'd woven. "Thought what?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "That I'd never find out? That you could keep this secret forever?" Tears spilled down her face, but they only seemed to fuel the anger burning inside me. She had robbed me of years of my life, of my right to know the truth about my own family. And now, everyone knew it. For a moment, no one spoke. Amelia's friends exchanged looks, some pulling away from her, unwilling to offer even the faintest comfort. Her parents looked as if they had aged 10 years in a single night, while my friends and family shook their heads, murmuring words of sympathy. I took one last look at the woman I'd once loved, feeling a strange sense of relief. It was over. The lies, the deceit, it was all out in the open now. There was no going back. Amelia collapsed into her chair, her face a mask of disbelief and horror. The weight of what she'd done was finally hitting her, but it was too late for apologies or explanations. I had given her everything, and she had torn it apart, leaving me with nothing but betrayal and lies. My voice softened, almost calm. "Amelia, this isn't just about you and me anymore. You destroyed our family with your selfishness, with your choices. I can't let this go. Not for me, and definitely not for our kids." She looked up at me, her eyes pleading. "Ethan, please, we can work this out. I made a mistake, a terrible one, but don't do this here, in front of everyone." I shook my head, unmoved. "The moment you started lying, you brought this on yourself. I've spent years trusting you, building a life with you, only to find out it was all a lie. This is where it ends, Amelia." Turning to her parents, I took a deep breath. "I'm sorry you had to find out this way. I know you love her, and this is as much of a shock to you as it is to me. But I can't stay silent about something like this. It's not fair to me, to our family, or to our kids." Her parents nodded, too stunned to speak, their faces etched with the pain of witnessing their daughter's betrayal. They offered no defense, no words of comfort, just a silent acknowledgement of what Amelia had done. It was as if, in that moment, they understood that there was no coming back from this. Amelia reached for my arm one last time, desperation spilling from her in waves. "Ethan, please. I love you. I don't want to lose you. We can make this right, somehow." But her words fell flat, empty and meaningless in the face of what she'd done. I met her gaze, feeling nothing but a hollow sense of finality. "Amelia, you lost me the day you decided to betray our marriage. You made your choice. Now, I'm making mine." Without another word, I turned and walked out, leaving her and the shattered remains of our life behind me. Walking away from that dinner felt like stepping out of a nightmare. The air outside was cool and still, a stark contrast to the storm that had raged inside the room moments before. I took a deep breath, letting the cold air steady me, as if breathing in this new reality would somehow ease the ache in my chest. I knew that my life was about to change in ways I hadn't fully grasped yet, but I also knew that this was the only path forward. As I drove home alone, my phone buzzed incessantly, messages from friends, family, even Amelia's parents. Everyone had something to say, and it was clear that the night's events were already the talk of everyone we knew. But I ignored the messages. Right now, I needed time to be alone, to let the reality of it all sink in. When I reached home, the silence inside was almost too loud. The memories of Amelia and I filled every corner of the house, a painful reminder of the life we'd built and the lies it had been built upon. I walked down the hallway, glancing at family photos on the walls, snapshots of a happy marriage that had, in hindsight, been little more than an illusion. I stopped by my son's room, watching him sleep, the innocence on his face almost too much to bear. He had no idea of the storm brewing, of the changes about to sweep through his life. I knew I'd have to be strong for him and his sister, to protect them from the fallout of their mother's choices. They deserved stability, love, and honesty. Everything Amelia and I had promised to give them. The night stretched on as I sat alone, replaying everything in my mind. I knew that divorcing Amelia would be a messy, painful process, but it was the only way forward. She had made her choice, and now it was time for me to reclaim my life. Tomorrow, I would start taking the next steps, filing the paperwork, securing a new place for me and the kids, and carving out a new life from the wreckage of this one. And as painful as it was, I felt a spark of hope, a small flicker of something that hinted at the possibility of a life beyond this betrayal. The next morning, I woke up with a strange sense of clarity. The anger, the heartbreak, it was all still there, but now it was tempered with resolve. I knew what I needed to do, and the first step was meeting with my lawyer. The sooner I filed for divorce, the sooner I could start moving on. As I walked into the lawyer's office, a heavy sense of finality settled over me. We reviewed the evidence I had, from Greg's photos to the DNA test. My lawyer was thorough and professional, guiding me through the process and discussing custody arrangements. He assured me that, given the circumstances, I'd have a strong case for full custody of the kids. I knew that protecting them was my top priority. Leaving the office, I felt like a weight had lifted from my shoulders. I wasn't free yet, but I had taken the first real step toward building a new life. I spent the rest of the day looking for a place to stay. I didn't want to uproot the kids right away, but I knew that in time, we'd need a fresh start somewhere far from the memories that haunted every room of our current home. That evening, I sat down with my kids, trying to keep things as normal as possible. They were too young to understand the details, but I could see the confusion in their eyes. Amelia had called multiple times, desperate for an explanation, for a chance to talk, but I'd ignored everyone. I couldn't let her manipulate the situation any further. Not for me, and definitely not for the kids. Instead, I spent time with them, reading their favorite books, laughing at their stories. I wanted them to know that, no matter what happened, I would always be there for them, that I would never betray the trust they had in me. And as I tucked them into bed, I realized that while Amelia's betrayal had shattered our family, it hadn't broken me. I was still standing, still fighting. This was my chance to rebuild, to create a life rooted in honesty and love, free from deceit. Just as I was about to turn in for the night, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from Amelia. I almost ignored it, but something made me read her words. "Ethan, please, just talk to me. I need to explain. The kids deserve to understand." For a moment, I felt a twinge of guilt. She was still their mother, and no matter how angry I was, I knew we'd eventually have to face each other to discuss their future. With a sigh, I replied, "Tomorrow, 10 a.m. at the park near the lake." I slept fitfully, thoughts swirling as I tried to prepare myself for what I'd say to her. The next morning, I arrived at the park early, watching as she approached, her face pale and drawn. She looked exhausted, her usual confidence replaced with a desperation that seemed almost foreign. "Thank you for meeting me," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm only here for the kids, Amelia. There's nothing left for us to discuss beyond them." She nodded, eyes cast downward. "I know. I made a terrible mistake, Ethan. I never meant to hurt you. Or them. I just got lost along the way." "Lost?" I scoffed, unable to hide my bitterness. "That's your excuse for lying to me for years? For making me think our daughter was mine?" Amelia's face crumpled, and she looked up at me with tears streaming down her cheeks. "I'm so sorry, Ethan. I was selfish, and I was wrong. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but please, let me be a part of the kids' lives." Her plea struck a chord, but it didn't erase the anger simmering just beneath the surface. "You put us all through hell, Amelia. I'll never forgive what you did to me. But the kids, they'll need their mother. I won't take them away from you, but this arrangement, This family will never be the same again. Her sobs grew quieter, and she nodded, knowing that this was all she could hope for. The trust was gone, shattered irreparably, and no amount of regret could change that. As she walked away, I realized that while her apology couldn't undo the damage, it allowed me to close the chapter on the pain she'd caused. And now, I could focus on the next step, creating a stable life for my children, a life free from the shadows of her betrayal. With the dust beginning to settle, I focused on building a fresh start for my children and me. It wasn't easy. The reminders of Amelia's betrayal were everywhere, from the empty side of our bed to the family photos I had reluctantly put away. But I had a new resolve, a fierce determination to create a home filled with love, honesty, and a sense of security for my kids. Over the next few weeks, I threw myself into setting up our new place. It wasn't far from their school, and though it was smaller, it felt right. Each piece of furniture, every picture on the wall, every small decoration was chosen with care, marking this space as ours. The kids took to decorating their rooms with excitement, picking out new colors and themes. I wanted them to feel as if this move was an adventure rather than an escape from a painful past. With the legal proceedings underway, I kept things as smooth as possible, avoiding any tension between Amelia and me in front of the kids. They didn't understand all of it, but I reassured them daily that both of their parents loved them. We shared custody for now, an arrangement that allowed the children to adjust gradually. My evenings were spent tucking them in, listening to their stories, and promising them that I would always be there. With each passing day, I felt a sense of healing, like I was slowly reclaiming pieces of myself that I hadn't realized I'd lost. For the first time in years, I felt a sense of peace, as though I had finally stepped out from under a dark cloud. There was still a long road ahead, but I knew that I was capable of facing it. I was stronger than I had ever believed possible, and I knew that my children and I were going to be okay. Months passed, and life slowly settled into a new rhythm. The rawness of Amelia's betrayal had dulled, replaced by a cautious optimism. I had built a routine around the kids, filled with weekend adventures, game nights, and quiet moments that reminded me of the joy and simplicity. Our new home wasn't just a house anymore. It was a safe space, a place where the shadows of the past couldn't reach us. I focused on healing, not just for myself but for my children. Therapy sessions helped me work through the anger, the bitterness, and the lingering questions that sometimes kept me awake at night. Over time, I came to see that Amelia's betrayal, as devastating as it was, had also given me a chance to rebuild my life on a foundation of strength and resilience. One evening, as the kids and I sat around the kitchen table, laughing over their silly stories from school, I realized just how far we'd come. The weight of what had happened no longer pressed down on me with the same intensity. I'd found joy again, real joy, in the family that mattered most, my children and myself. Occasionally, I'd see Amelia during exchanges, but there was a distance between us now, a polite yet resolute separation. We communicated only about the kids, and I kept the boundaries firm. She, too, seemed to understand that the chapter we had shared was closed, with no pages left to turn back to. She had once been my partner, but now she was a part of my past. As I looked ahead, I felt a sense of freedom and hope. The pain had transformed into lessons that would shape the father and man I wanted to be. And while I knew the road wasn't always going to be easy, I was finally walking it with a clear mind and an open heart. The journey had been painful, but it had led me to a place of peace and possibility, a place where I was ready to move forward, stronger than ever. Thank you for joining me on this journey. Have you ever faced a betrayal or hardship that taught you something valuable? Share your experiences below, and remember to like and subscribe for more stories of resilience and growth.